How's it going, everyone? I'm JGeks, and this is my fourth video covering planetary materials in EVE Echoes. Nero Augustus, one of the NetEase developers for the game, posted on the official Discord last week that they plan to restrict players below Tech Level 7 and Alpha Clone characters not having an Omega subscription to only being able to gather planetary materials in high-sec systems. This change is scheduled to take effect in this week's patch. Unfortunately, this change will hurt newer players that started the game weeks after the official launch or waited until they had enough ISK in-game to buy their Omega subscription with in-game currency. There's always the chance that they have modified this decision since they announced it last week, so keep a close eye on the wording in this week's patch notes, as these concerns were brought up immediately to the development team, so they may have modified the changes slightly from what they announced last week. This change in the upcoming patch to planetary material gathering will force people that were running multiple accounts from launching their planetary materials in low or nullsec and just having their main account gather all of the cargo containers that spawned. That was circumventing the alpha clone restrictions of trading the PI mats, so one person with 10 accounts could collect an absurd amount of planetary materials and put them up on the market, which was keeping planetary material prices lower than what they should have been. Expect all planetary materials to go up quickly in price in the coming weeks, as there will be a dip in supply due to this patch change. Players with multiple accounts will still be able to collect these planetary materials in high-sec, but it now forces them to only gathering smaller quantities as high-sec deposits have a reduced output and not being able to as easily transfer the materials to a single account. This will reduce the incentive to run planetary material accounts, but not eliminate it entirely. So once again, this change will reduce planetary material supply on the markets considerably, so expect all planetary materials to go up in price in the next few weeks. Now we'll take a look at the tier chart. This tier chart, just like the last one I made, shows the ISK per hour per mining array for every planetary material in the game. It ranks them in order not only from top to bottom in separate tiers, but also left to right. So silicate glass is slightly better than crystal compound and precious alloy currently. I have based the tier chart by calculating all of the outputs as perfect deposits in a 0.0 system. This means that if you're in a system with a higher security than 0.0, these ISK per hour values will be slightly lower, and if you're in deep null in a negative security system, these values will be slightly higher than what is shown. Glossy compound and heavy metals have also remained near the top of the best planetary materials to be going after, both staying above 6,000 ISK per hour per mining array. Super tensile plastic and silicate glass have both surged in price. This is due to the demand for building structures currently, as many nullsec alliances are currently trying to build and put up capsuleer outposts in their well-defended regions in nullsec. Construction blocks have also benefited from the demand of structures by moving up to the third tier, but not as much as silicate glass or super tensile plastics. Sheen compound, opulent compound, and gleaming alloys are all sitting comfortably in the third tier, and their prices have remained relatively stable. These are very good options if you can't find good sources for higher tier materials in your area. Reactive and toxic metals are both good options as well in the third tier. They suffer from a low base output compared to other planetary materials, but they make up for it in price, both selling for around 500 ISK each. Since they have a higher cost and lower output, this gives them an additional benefit of having a quicker launch time. This is an important factor if you're gathering planetary materials in a populated area, since you don't have to wait as long for them to launch, as players can steal your planetary materials in low and nullsec systems. The rest of these planetary materials should only be gathered if you're having difficulty finding the higher tier materials in your area, or if you're stocking up for your own manufacturing. Noble gas, heavy water, industrial fibers, and base metals are the worst planetary materials to be gathering currently. This means that you should expect their prices to either go up, as they're significantly underpriced, or just oversaturated in the market currently. Here's a quick look at the official graphs that NetEase put out for EVE Echoes. I'll cover these more in a separate video, but I just wanted to show them leading into the planetary material prices that we're about to go over. The y-axis shows the quantity on a scale of 1 billion, starting at 0.5 billion in the top graph and going up to 3.5 billion at its highest value. That's what the scientific notation of E+9 means. The main takeaway from the top graph is that lustering alloy and noble metals are overfarmed, which is a major factor in why their prices have been slow to rise. Opulent compounds and gleaming alloys are also overfarmed, but these at least have a significant demand to keep their prices high, as they're used much more frequently in ship manufacturing. The second takeaway is how little structural materials are being gathered, leading to a very volatile market for structural materials. This small supply of these materials allow the prices to fluctuate more so than any of the other categories we're about to go over. This makes it so players are able to manipulate the market for some of these materials, as we'll see later on in this video. The second graph is also on the scale of 1 billion, starting at 0.2 billion and going up to 1.6 billion. You can see from this graph that the majority of planetary material arrays are in the areas surrounding Jita, in Lone Trek, the Forge, and Vale of the Silent. Delve has the highest planetary material output for the nullsec regions. Now we'll take a look at the alloys. Lustering alloy has seen a slight decline in price over the past few weeks, now averaging between 70 and 90 ISK each. Lustering alloys are used in manufacturing all Tier 4 to Tier 6 ships in the game, so they currently still have a demand with so many new players in EVE Echoes. They're not used in the higher tier blueprints that have increased material needs like the battlecruisers, so that's one of the reasons for their price to be lower than the other alloys, since Tier 4 and Tier 6 blueprints require a smaller amount of materials. Precious alloys are a requirement for all Tier 7 and above ships, as well as the Venture 3 and all faction ships. These alloys will always be in demand because of this, so expect precious alloys to always be expensive compared to the other alloys and to be a good material to gather if you're looking to make the most ISK with your planetary material mining arrays. When Tier 7 unlocked, these alloys spiked in price up to 500 to 600 ISK each, and have since fallen back down to stabilize in price around the 240 ISK mark. Expect another jump in price when Tier 8 unlocks in another month. Another thing to note for precious alloys is that there are no perfect deposits in the game for them. They only appear as rich, medium, or poor. This is another factor that keeps the price higher for them than the other alloys. Gleaming alloys are a requirement for all Minmatar and Caldari ships and have stabilized in price between 170 to 180 ISK each. They're the most consistent alloy in price and will always have a need since they are used in half the ships in the game and aren't tier dependent. Gleaming alloys are a good material to collect if you enjoy flying Minmatar or Caldari ships and manufacture them yourself, or just to sell them on the market to other players. The last alloy is condensed alloy. These alloys are used in all industrial ships and faction ships in the game. Faction ships have a larger material requirement which keeps the demand up for these alloys, but these alloys have been slowly falling in price and have now started to stabilize in price around 110 to 140 ISK. If you're someone who makes your own faction ships or provides the materials for them, it's a good idea to stock up on these before the new planetary material patch comes out, as they'll most certainly go up in price. Here you'll see the ISK per hour rates per mining array. If you're gathering alloys with your planetary mining arrays, focus on precious alloys and gleaming alloys. Make sure to avoid lustering alloys as they'll only give you a third of the ISK per hour compared to precious and gleaming alloys. Condensed alloys are a viable option if you can't find a good source for precious alloy or gleaming alloys in your area. Now we'll take a look at the compounds. Sheen compounds used in all Amarr and Galenti ships in the game and has been climbing in price over the last few weeks, now sitting at 150 to 220 ISK each. The large range signifies that Sheen compounds still haven't stabilized in price, so keep an eye on where the Sheen prices end up. If you're someone who flies or makes Amarr and Galenti ships, make sure to buy it when it's at the lower end of this range, as it tends to spike and fall in price between 150 and 220 ISK at the moment. Motley compounds are used for all Tier 4 and Tier 5 ships and is constantly found between 120 and 130 ISK each. There are still plenty of pilots that fly around in these lower tier ships, so Motley compound still has a demand which is keeping its price from dipping any lower. Fiber composite is the cheapest of all the compounds. It's only used in crafting Tier 6 and above frigates, including faction frigates. It's also used on the Venture 3. Fiber composite has stayed between 70 and 100 ISK for several weeks now and rarely goes over 100 ISK. If you're someone who pilots frigates, it's a good idea to stock up on these before the planetary material patch comes out this week. Don't gather these with your planetary mining arrays if you're looking to sell your planetary materials on the market for profit, as all the other compounds are better choices. Lucian compound is used on all Tier 6 and above destroyers and has fallen in price dramatically over the past 2 weeks, now sitting at 120 to 130 ISK each. This is due to destroyers seeing little use outside of group play, as they're not fast and mobile as frigates, and not as tanky or damaging as a cruiser. They're currently stuck in the middle ground, not being able to specialize in either role, and finding more of a utility playstyle in fleet combat. This should change with the introduction of spheres later this month, so if you plan on flying destroyers then, make sure to stock up on Lucian Compound while they're still cheap. Opulent compounds are used in all Tier 6 and above cruisers and industrial ships. These compounds will keep their value as many people choose to stick to cruisers for PvP and PvE combat. They've seen a surge in price and are trending upwards, currently sitting between 130 to 200 ISK each. Opulent compounds are a good planetary material to gather if you can't find any of the other top-tier planetary materials in your area. Glossy compounds are used in all battlecruiser blueprints, and because of this, are the most expensive compound in the game currently, trending upward in price and currently staying between 190 and 200 ISK each. Expect Glossy compound to spike in price when Tier 8 unlocks next month. Crystal compound has jumped up to the top tier of planetary materials to mine for currently, and is at a stable price between 180 and 200 ISK each. These compounds are used for all faction battleships, Tier 8 and above drones, and covert op modules. Expect crystal compounds to continue to go up in price as we get closer to unlocking Tier 8 next month, as well as a massive spike in price when Tier 8 does unlock. Dark compounds are used for all cloaking modules and some Tier 7 and above drones. It's currently ranging between 145 and 150 ISK and doesn't see much movement in price. Sheen compound, opulent compound, glossy compound, and crystal compound are the best planetary materials in the compound category to focus on with your mining arrays from the Planetology skills. These will give you some great passive income and are always in demand on the market. Currently, you should be avoiding mining for fiber composite with your arrays until their price goes up. Crystal compounds will be a component for faction battleships when Tier 8 comes out, so that's a great compound to be stocking up on as their price will spike when players hit Tier 8 in the next month. Now we'll go over the metals. Noble metals have seen no change in price over the past 2 weeks, staying right around 110 to 115 ISK. These are used for all Minmatar and Caldari ships. Noble metals should be bought off the market as they're currently undervalued, and you'll get more ISK mining for the other metals with your arrays. Reactive metals have been slowly climbing in price, pushing their way close to 500 ISK, and are used in all Tier 6 and above ships as well as faction frigates. So expect reactive metals to stay in demand and to hold their value. They suffer from a low output, but make up for it in their price, which makes them a great planetary material to go after, as it takes less time to launch them if you're in a highly trafficked system and afraid of getting your material stolen. Toxic metals are used in all venture and faction ships. These metals should hold their value and usually stay within the same price range as the reactive metals. They're a great planetary material to mine for the same reason we just went over for the reactive metals, having a lower output but making up for it in a higher price. Base metals are used for all Tier 4 and Tier 5 ships, as well as the Venture 1 and 2. They have the same low output as the reactive and toxic metals, but they're selling for 4 times cheaper than those metals. This means that base metal should be avoided in your mining arrays at all costs, as they're the worst planetary material in the game when looking at ISK per hour per mining array. Heavy metals are used in all Galenti and Amarr ships and have been trending downward in price, now staying around the 170 to 185 ISK range. They have a higher output than reactive, toxic, and base metals, so they are viable to mine with your planetary arrays. Looking at the ISK per hour per mining array, you can see that noble metals are slightly behind the other 3 metals, reactive, toxic, and heavy, but not nearly as bad as the base metals, which should be avoided at all costs and only bought off the market until their price goes up, since they have the worst ISK per hour rate in the game. Even though heavy metals have a lower value than reactive and toxic metals, they always have a significantly higher output, which puts them ahead of the other metals. Reactive and toxic metals are a great choice to mine for with your arrays, since it will take less time for them to launch than most of the other materials in the game. Now we'll take a look at all the fuels in EVE Echoes. Fuels are used to power all structures and group modules in EVE Echoes. Fuel prices are still trending upward in all cases except for heavy water, which has stayed around the 4 to 5 ISK range for a few weeks now. Heavy water gives the least amount of energy from all the fuels at 2 gigajoules, so it requires a lot of inventory space to transport, which makes them a non-ideal source for fueling things like structures in deep nullsec, as they're difficult to transport as they require a lot of cargo space. This is why you see heavy water and suspended plasma as the best gigajoule to ISK ratio, because they come with the downside of being difficult to transport in bulk. With corporations and alliances putting more and more capsuleer outposts up each day, and also incorporating more and more group modules into their combat fleets, expect fuel prices to continue to rise, as all the fuels besides heavy water have at least doubled in value since my last video. So those of you who took my advice in investing into these, I hope it paid off. These will continue to rise in price, but not nearly as fast as they just did in the past few weeks. All of these fuels besides heavy water have at least doubled in value since my last video. So those of you that took my advice and invested into this category of planetary materials, I hope it gained you some decent ISK. These fuels will continue to rise in price, but not nearly as fast as they just did in the past few weeks. Looking at the ISK per hour rates per mining array, you can see that these fuels still aren't as valuable as the other planetary material categories, so that's a good reason to expect these prices to continue to rise until they come closer to the other planetary materials in value. Currently, ionic solutions and plasmoids are the two best fuels to be mining for with your planetary arrays. The last thing we'll look at are the structural materials. Nearly all the structural materials have gone up in value over the past 2 weeks, with more and more corporations and alliances establishing their null space and setting up capsuleer outposts in their territories. Expect structural materials to continue to rise in price, as some of these outposts will eventually be destroyed since they're a primary target for alliance attacks. Larger alliances will also look to put as many outposts up as they can if they're able to properly defend them. Reactive gas has gone up about 50% in value over the past 2 weeks, along with coolant, condensates, construction blocks, and nanites. Super tensile plastic and silicate glass have tripled in price over the past week. These two planetary materials have jumped into the top tiers to be mining for currently. Super tensile plastic prices are being manipulated in a strange way in the market, as they will rise to over 400 ISK in a matter of a few hours and then gradually fall back down in price. Silicate glass is the same way, but not as drastic as the super tensile plastics. These structural materials do not have as much supply in the market, which lets them be manipulated in price much easier than the materials like alloys and compounds. Keep a very close eye on these two materials if you're needing them for crafting structures, and make sure to stock up on them when their price inevitably dips back down, as their price inflation is most certainly due to corporations and alliance manipulation, as it doesn't follow any of the same trends as the other structural materials. Currently, only the structural materials you see on the chart above 4,000 ISK should be mined for with your planetary arrays. The rest can and should be bought off the market, as there are better materials on the list to put your arrays on. If you're going after super tensile plastic or silicate glass, keep in mind their prices will more than likely fall back down, as their prices have been certainly manipulated by an alliance or several organized corporations, or just an extremely wealthy player having some fun with the structures market. My new corporation, the GEKS Trading Federation, is still recruiting, and we're over 80 members now based out of the Cloud Ring region. If you want to join, apply in-game by searching GEKS in all capital letters and join my Discord server with the link in the description. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I was extremely busy getting this corporation up and running with several corporation programs, including an ore and planetary materials buyback system, and setting up the Discord server for it. So I apologize for the long delay between my recent videos and streams. I should be back to a regular schedule here soon now that the corporation is up and running smoothly. Thanks for watching my video. Subscribe if you want to receive notifications when I make updates to my planetary materials and ore and minerals series. I have a few standalone videos as well in the works. Thank you to my Patreon subscriber, Drew N, and all of my subscribers on Twitch, especially Arteezy Eve, who's gifted over 10 subs to my community. Thanks.